Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into something absolutely fascinating today. We're going to unpack a mechanism that dictates almost everything we do, yet it remains almost entirely invisible to us. We're talking about the mechanics of habit. Let's decode the underlying machinery of our daily routines to really understand how we form habits and learn new behaviors.
So, how do we actually learn? It's a pretty fundamental question, isn't it? When you develop a brand new habit or, suddenly feel a wave of anxiety just from hearing a phone buzz across the room, what is actually happening inside your brain and body? Well, by the end of this explainer, we'll have a clear, scientific answer to that exact question.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll look at the three learning theories, decode behaviorist theories, zoom in on Pavlov and his dog, break down the rules of classical conditioning, and finally, look at real-world educational implications.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, the three learning theories, mapping the academic landscape.
So, learning theories generally try to explain the actual mechanics involved in how we process and learn things. And academics usually group these into three main buckets: behaviorist, cognitive, and constructivist. For our explainer today, we're taking out our magnifying glass and placing it squarely on that first column. Specifically, we're going to see exactly where Pavlov fits right into the behaviorist framework. Moving right along to Section 2, decoding behaviorist theories, specifically the SR relation.
Okay, to really understand behaviorism, we absolutely have to start with the concept of a stimulus. Simply put, it's just an event that activates a behavior. Behaviorist theories basically say that learning is a process where an experience causes a permanent change in behavior, and it all begins with this initial trigger setting the whole shebang into motion.
And right on the heels of that is the second half of our equation, the response. This is the observable reaction to a stimulus. Think of it like accidentally touching a hot stove and immediately yanking your hand away. That's a response. Behaviorism interprets all learning strictly through this SR connection. In the very strict behaviorist view, if we can't physically observe the reaction, well, we can't measure the learning.
Which brings us to Section 3, Pavlov and his dog, the classic experiment.
So, Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was a Russian physiologist, and he was actually the very first person to perform experiments studying how these specific stimuli and responses are associated. He developed what we call classical conditioning. This basically means modifying the relationship between a natural stimulus and its natural response, but doing it through artificial substitution. The really crucial takeaway here is that Pavlov viewed learning essentially as habit formation, and he figured you could build those habits entirely by swapping out a natural stimulus with an artificial one.
Let's walk through this iconic experiment, kind of like a three-act play. Act 1, Step 1, before conditioning. Pavlov presented food, which is the unconditioned stimulus, and the dog naturally salivated. Ringing a bell? Absolutely no response. Makes sense, right? Then we get to Step 2, during conditioning. He presented the food and the bell together. The dog salivates, mostly because of the food. But then we hit the massive aha moment in Step 3. After doing this a bunch of times, Pavlov just rang the bell alone. And guess what? The artificial stimulus was now enough to trigger the salivation all by itself. The bell had literally become a conditioned stimulus.
Let's look a bit deeper in Section 4, Rules of Classical Conditioning, the 5 Principles.
These first two rules are basically two sides of the exact same coin. First up is stimulus generalization. This is the tendency to respond in the exact same way to similar stimuli. So imagine learning to fear a really specific aggressive dog, and then suddenly feeling that exact same fear toward literally all dogs. That's generalization. On the flip side, we have stimulus discrimination. This is the process of learning to differentiate among those similar things, learning that, hey, while a snarling wolf definitely requires caution, a friendly golden retriever really doesn't.
But what actually happens to a habit over time? Well, in phase 1, a conditioned response is completely active. But if we continually break the association between the conditioned and unconditioned stimuli, we slide right into phase 2, which is extinction. The conditioned response gradually weakens and just sort of fades away. However, it's not always gone forever. Enter phase 3, spontaneous recovery. This is the super fascinating return of a conditioned response after a period of time has passed. Your brain essentially holds onto the blueprint, just waiting for the right moment to bring that habit back to life.
And the fifth and final principle here is the delayed conditioned response. This happens when the conditioned stimulus remains present for a fixed period, like a deliberate delay, before the unconditioned stimulus is actually introduced. Think of a traffic light turning yellow.
Your brain learns the exact timing of that delay before the red light appears. After repeated exposure, a conditioned response safely develops based on the timing of your environment, just as much as the trigger itself. Finally, Section 5, Real-World Educational Implications, and really, why it matters to you. You might be thinking, okay, dogs and bells, sure, but this scientific toolkit is actually used everywhere in our daily lives. When educators associate a picture with a word or teach the alphabet to kids, they are relying entirely on classical conditioning. But it goes way beyond just early education. We use these exact SR relationships for developing good personal habits, strategically breaking our bad ones, eliminating debilitating phobias through targeted exposure, and even generating deep interest in a completely new subject. Conditioning is basically the invisible framework behind how we adapt to our entire world. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a really fun question to ponder. Have you been classically conditioned? Think about a specific habit or a phobia that you have right now. What was the unconditioned stimulus? And what was the neutral thing that became conditioned to cause your reaction? Once you start looking at your own behaviors through Pavlov's lens, you realize our daily routines are really just a collection of fascinating, programmed responses. Until next time, keep exploring the mechanics of your mind.